office or are you home?
Okay, there we are, guys. Now we've got to sort it out. Participants coming in.
Later.
And you should have Peter. Where's Peter gone? Oh, there he is. Got him.
Yeah.
Stay still, Peter. More. And I've just made Peter the host.
Okay.
Yes. Now, the other thing that should be happening is I am recording, guys, just letting you know. If there's an issue with that, please make no comments. Otherwise, this is being recorded so that we can make it available to our profession later on. Hopefully we get a half a dozen or a dozen or 30 or 40 of these little snippets that'll help improve the quality of report writing generally in our profession.
Mm-hmm.
So any questions before we get going, guys? We've sorted out the technical problems. We allowed 5 minutes for that. We're less than that, so we're doing really well.
Good.
Good
to go.
Well, let me share my desktop with you, and I've got to make sure I get this right. Share my screen. I'm hoping, no, it's not. Where's my desktop? Can anyone see that? Well, one way to do it. Okay, let's just see. Does that give you my desktop now?
Looks like it, yeah.
Yes, yep.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
So on that basis then, I don't know whether you notice whether those of you who use Word, and I know that not all of you do, and I understand that there are other pieces of software that are equally as effective, perhaps even arguably more effective than Word. But if you use Word and you have it set up at the bottom of your taskbar, it's a really neat little spot just to be able to click on with a right click on your mouse, and then you can open a document that you want to open fairly easily and quickly that you've just been working on. So here, for example, I've got Orchard Hills. I was just having a look at it to see whether it was a suitable document for what I wanted to do. And the answer was yes. Because I've had it open, it's there on my list. And I'll close that down and I'll make the font a little bigger just so you can read it. So this is a basic letter type report that we would use for most of our communication. The reason why is it's 3 pages long. It doesn't make sense to have a header page, a table of contents, an executive summary, and it doesn't make sense to spend 4 or 5 hours adding a whole pile of extra stuff the client doesn't need in order to pad it out to get to that stage. And this is a report that has gone out, and I see automatically problems with it. And that's normal in arboriculture. It's normal for me. I don't want to have problems. Someone's edited this and they've allowed an image to roll. I would have tweaked and played with that to make sure that the image didn't roll. And the way I deal with that is that I've made my footer a lot smaller, moved it down. It's only got page 1 of 3 on it, so it didn't need anything else. And then it would have been up the top and looking like a little bit more appropriate response. Also notice there's a grammatical mistake here. There's a comma missing after therefore. Therefore is an interrupter, so we start with therefore, comma. So you can see here I am talking about reports, and I don't know a lot about report writing. In fact, I think most of you know that I failed HSC English. So from my side, it can be a little frustrating getting it right. And in spite of that, I'm still seeing things that are new all the time. I'm learning things all the time. And so it seems that we're probably all doing the same thing. And so the purpose of this group will be to grow it and allow for members of the group to say, hey, look, I've got something that's really useful to go over, or have you seen this? I'd like to discuss and talk about it. So here's one that I've been dealing with a lot recently within the TAFE situation. I'm writing currently resources for TAFE. By the way, there's a full stop missing there. You can see it's been edited and things get missed. So this hypertext link, yeah, everyone knows it's a hypertext link, but it looks ghastly. Who would agree?
Yeah.
Yep, great. So I would rather change that hypertext link. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to copy the text that I wanted to become, which is soil moisture. I'm going to take out the brackets, and then I'm going to come up here and I'm going to right click on it, and it says edit hyperlink, first option. The hyperlink is there, it's down the bottom. It's a tiny URL. I'll put a tiny URL in to shorten the hypertext link. But now I'm just using the full hypertext link. I don't shorten them at all. So I would normally just copy a very large link, and then I do this. I go text to display, and I've said, okay, I want to display a soil moisture meter. And there it is. Can you see how that's changed it? Now, unfortunately, at the moment, my computer's misbehaving. So if I go copy, maybe I can do open hypertext link. It might open. Skip verification. Just in case it hasn't, I'll copy the hypertext link. And I'll go across to Chrome. So didn't like doing it, that's fine. Control V, on the URL. And there it is, there's the moisture meter. Now if I copy the correct full hypertext link, copy, I'll just go back and I'll show you the same process. Control V. Now, who wants to have a hypertext link that long? That's just plain ghastly, which is why we've been shortening it with tiny URLs. But I can do exactly that same thing. Right click on it. It says edit hypertext link. The link stays there, by the way. You can go in, interrogate it, and ask it what it is still. I'll show you how to do that in a second. Oh, great big long hypertext link. And I'm going to type a soil moisture. Now I'm going to spell moisture wrong and show you what happens with that. It's a pretty interesting process. So I spelled a soil moisture meter wrong. And you can see here, the normal word spell checker comes in and checks your hypertext link. And so you can just change that, right click, moisture is what it's meant to be. And that both changes the text in your document and changes the hypertext link at the same time, which is a pretty neat little thing to do. So now we have.
Can I say something on that, Mark?
Sorry?
Can I say something on that? If you change the wording of, like, I don't mind a tiny URL, but if you change the wording on that, if someone was to print that document, you wouldn't be able to then you can type in that tiny URL off a printed document and still search that up on the internet, where if you change the wording of that or that large URL, you've lost that potential to find that information that you had.
Absolutely, Luke. So you've got to look at one of the things that generally we're seeing more and more of is digital reports and people handling things digitally, but you're absolutely right. The advantage of the tiny URL is it's quick and short enough to type in. The advantage of this is if you're reading it online, you're reading it in a digital format. And remember, if I save this now as a PDF file, well, let me try doing that. File, save as. I want to go to, let me go to a spot where it's easy for me to grab again. Browse. True reports current. And then I want to save it as a PDF. Save. So I've done that, it's saved as a PDF. I now have to go down and pull that out and open that file up. There it is. PDF automatically inserts that same hypertext system in it. So there it is. I can right click on it or just leave my finger over it, and you can see there's the hypertext link coming up there. Everyone see that? Or do you need, I'll go larger. Sorry, just let me do that for you. Whoa, too large. If I run my mouse over the hypertext link, it shows you the full link. And again, you can copy it or click and open. The only thing is at the moment, for some reason, my computer is not allowing me to open from any document, including emails. So I've just got to sort that problem out. But you've got the concept of how it works. So yes, Luke, you've got to weigh it up and say, what am I doing and where am I going? One of the nice things is, from a consultant's perspective, when you send it to a client and you've charged them a fee for it, if they print it and circulate it to 100 of their friends, none of those 100 friends are going to get the same information as easily. So there is that added advantage. So you've got to weigh that up. But certainly if you're writing a document, and I've been doing, as I said, a fair bit of that at TAFE, and again, if it's a printed document, it's absolutely no good to them. If it's a digital document, it's a lot more useful. Sorry, I should go from down here. And this document here, as it opens up, so you'll notice that I've used that exact process here. So there's Australian tree IDs, that Facebook group. So wherever we have it in the things, the links are given as these explained hypertext link. We've changed the text. You happy with that?
Yep.
And of course, if you're reading it online, it's really great. And for those of you who are wondering about, or we've talked about the twin gums, I did finally find this photograph from 1920 that showed that the twin gums at the Botanic Gardens were not present, or if they were tiny trees. So we know now that the twin gums were less than 100 years of age when they were struck by lightning. So it gives you some comparison. And yet they were definitely there in 1950 something or other, when here it is, in this image here in 1952, you can see them. So it does give you the opportunity to think. So here I've talked about, for example, using black markers and white chalk, and then I've given a link to some photographs rather than having to necessarily put every photograph in every document in. So this explains how black markers and white chalk's used to show growth increments in a tree. Happy with that?
Mhm. Yep.
Yeah.
Any other questions on how that process works? Is that a useful tool to have? You're writing a document, a policy document. You don't necessarily want to have a great big URL in. You may want to put a tiny URL in. You may not. In this document here, one of the things where there is an important reference put in, you'll notice that the reference, whoa, come on. Stupid long documents. The references have the full URLs in them. So because references are very important in any document, including the full URL, or at least a tiny URL at that point is important. And I have no problems in the using of tiny URLs. Is everyone comfortable with what we've just done?
Yep.
Yeah.
Anyone want to discuss it in any further detail?
Yeah, that's saying I think it looks quite professional as a document to reword it and be able to do that. But as I said, like, the only downside is that printing, that if it is to be handed out in some way as a non-digital format, then you've lost that link. Yeah, and look, I mean, I can tell you here, for example, this is the article that's on the Arborist website by Jessica and myself on accidental deaths in trees. Now, being able to put the link to the paper there is just really neat, because someone can go check the references, but here it is. You can just go open it up and have a read of the paper. And you'll actually find that a lot more journals, online journals, are now starting to do exactly the same process. Wherever the paper's available online,
they give you the reference and a link, excuse me, a link to that reference. So it just really makes it easier for the parties involved to find the documents.
I think it's a lot better to be actually able to go and find those reference documents rather than just have them as this hypothetical, well, yes, if you know where to find it and are willing to pay the money to get access to it.
That's right. And the nice thing about it, Peter, is if I attached the document, a lot of times I'd be breaching copyright. And a lot of times they're available on the internet, but they're not correctly posted. The author might have put it up and it still might be copyright by a journal, but I can link to the author's copy of it and I'm not breaching copyright. So there's no breach of copyright in me referring to a document that's online. Okay. Yep. So hypertext links are really valuable in adding communication material and adding resources to the process. And you know, I've got, as you know, a fair few of these sort of papers on my computer. You know, having to attach them, particularly if you're doing a legal case, is a pain, whereas this way you can just, again, attach the paper and you can say something like that, and they can go out and read the paper without having to ask you to go out and grab it. And that's just a horrible process. So certainly I'll be working more and more towards that process. And all these here are still to be all referenced, and I'll do that same process with all of these. These are all public domain publications. Some people won't understand them, but that's okay. At least they'll get the link to it. So excellent. Well, hopefully that's useful for you, not on all occasions, but on some occasions. So next one. My notes tell me that we're going to look at VTA terminology. And that was something that really became obvious to me when I was looking at this unit. And I recently taught another unit called Performer Ground-Based Defect Evaluation. It became a mandatory unit to do. I don't know, Kai, when you went through, was that, or Luke, it was when you did it, wasn't it?
Yeah, I did it.
Yeah. And you did a whole pile of risk assessments. And
yeah, I did too. Yep.
Yeah, but who said I did too? Oh, Derek.
Oh, Derek. Yeah, sorry, mate.
Yeah, great. No, welcome. Yeah, if you actually read the unit, the word risk is used in that unit 0 times. It says, go out and have a look at a defect. Okay, examine it. And then if you need to quantify the nature or the size of the defect, and that is essentially what Matic calls stage 1 VTA. Go out and look for something in the tree that you think is going to increase or may increase the likelihood of the tree failing. Now, we've gone away from the word defect, and in these notes, it's very clear now. We talk about factors and features. A feature of a tree is just something that you're looking at. You see a big swelling, perhaps a hole or an opening, a fruiting body of phallinus. Well, I see a fruiting body of phallinus. My typical response is to say, oh, this tree's stronger at that point than it used to be. And just ignore it because it's just a feature in the tree. It's not a factor that will affect failure. So one of the things that Matic talks about is the first stage is to examine the health of the tree. If it's a healthy tree and it's growing well, then what do we expect?
It will react and do what it needs.
Yeah, it'll adapt as it needs to, that it shouldn't have any big problem. And so that's his first stage. The second stage is you see something and now you need to get more information because you've looked at it and it's something that triggers that second response. It might be that you want to go out and tap the tree. It might be that you decide you want a tomograph test done. You might want a resistograph test done. That's starting to get some measurements. That's stage 2 of a VTA. And stage 3 is getting detailed measurements. So you might use an impedance meter, you might use a tomograph and a resistograph are probably appropriate there. Whereas the normal stage 2 would be tapping with a hammer, sounding, probing with a a probe of some description, maybe making some measurements. You might measure the trunk circumference and then measure the wall thickness of the tree, something like that. So that's your stage 2. Stage 3 would include your fractometer, your tomography, those sort of things. And I notice we get a lot in reports, and hopefully most of you don't do this. They'll say, I did a stage 1 VTA, and what they really are saying is, I went out and I looked at the tree. Or I went out and inspected the tree visually. It doesn't necessarily mean that I considered the health and started to look for all those features that may be of concern from a risk perspective. And realistically, why would you in some situations? And, you know, it's entirely meaningless. So I think it's really important that we keep a copy, keep in our mind what Maddox says and divide them up appropriately. So stage 1 is that assessing the health of the tree and then looking at features that may be a concern. So you see a codominant stem, and you should all know the answer to this. You see a codominant stem that's included on a Araucaria. What do?
Nothing.
Ignore it.
Take a photo.
You see a cavity in a relatively healthy growing Eucalyptus teraticornis. It's got a meter diameter trunk, and the cavity is at 50%. So there's 25% wall thickness still. What do?
Nothing.
Anyone?
Target? Probably nothing.
You ignore it unless you're a public school, in which case you cut it down and cut it into pieces, because eventually, and I read a report the other day that almost made me die. It said, this tree is possibly dangerous and therefore should probably be removed. That's a really vague answer, isn't it? So, yeah, on that teraticornis, you would ignore it. But the only way you can get an idea on how much decay there is there is to go stage 2. And sometimes when you're looking at a tree, you won't need to go to stage 2 at all. In fact, quite frequently you won't.
Yeah.
Okay. You know, if I
This is, you're talking about specifically situations where you're looking at the risk from the trees, aren't you, Mark?
Well, that's where VTA is actually made for. It's made as a process to assess the body language of trees and the visual indicators, or visual indicia, if you want to call them that, and say, okay, what do I do next? What should I do next? And, you know, I certainly am like you. I get out a probe, usually a screwdriver or a soil knife. I get out a sounding hammer, usually a sounding hammer or the back of my soil knife. I use both. You know, every now and again, I'm going to check something out. A lot of times I see something and I just ignore it. Other times I see it and I understand that it's still a low risk. So I might see a dead tree. Typically on a dead tree, I'll just give it a little bit of a push. And that's it. I'm done. What I know about that dead tree when I've given it a bit of a push, particularly if it's a small to medium-sized tree, is it likely to fall in the next 12 months? No. I've quantified that by doing some load testing.
Yep.
Everyone happy on that? So I think it's just important, and certainly it's something that I've done very recently. I've gone back through all my my definitions of a stage 1 VTA to make sure that they're consistent with the paper. Because if they're not consistent with the paper, I probably shouldn't be using a term that may be confused to be what's in that paper. So I've gone out, I've said, I've done a visual tree assessment. What I meant is I've assessed the tree visually. I've just had a look at it, that's all. The next thing is something goes wrong and someone says, but Kai, you did a full VTA. This is what you did. So I'm very careful now to just communicate that clearly. So that's the point on that. And if you if you flick me an email, I'll pull you up the current little footnote that I use for a stage 1 VTA in standard risk report. I'll flick you what I've got worded. And if you can improve on it, please improve on it and let me and others know as well. By the way, if I were to do this again now, I'd look at this and I'd say, what do I want to communicate with this URL? And I'd change this to, because this is unclear, I'd say the hose, so that it is just weeping. And I'd have perhaps set the hose as just weeping as my hypertext link and get rid of that altogether. Happy with that, everybody? Okay, let me close that. The last thing that we thought we'd discuss today as in our first trial is the issue of seeing red. And this was raised by Peter Gray, who said, you know, I'm blue-green colorblind, red-blue colorblind. Is that right, Peter?
Red-green colorblind.
Red-green colorblind. He said, so oftentimes it's not clear what's being talked about. And let me just pull up a report again. I'm pretty sure this one's got an image with an arrow in it. If not, the next one will have. Oh, okay, there's a picture with some numbers on it. And I'm still doing things with my paragraph and formatting display, so I've just done that. Can you read that, Peter?
Yep, no trouble at all.
No trouble at all. But if I put red, if I change this to red, and I can't do that because what I've done is to stop that getting moved around, I've actually done a snippet and put it in. But if I change that to red or put a red one in there now, and I can do that, insert text box, raw text box, and I'm going to put in one here, no fill, and I'm going to put the text to red, and I'm going to put, can you read that, Peter?
I can see an outline because, yes, I can see it, but it's almost
Really
impossible to read without.
Really hard.
Yeah, very hard. I've lived with this all my life, so I have strategies for coping, and there's certain things. So the tree photograph shows various changes throughout the canopy, whereas the number has lines, so I can see the lines, but it doesn't stand out for me the same way as the other colors do.
So there's something to think about, that we need to be careful. Now, I use red a lot. In fact, it's my primary line color. And when Peter raised it, I thought, bummer. It's a really great color for me to use. So let's have a look at some of those standard colors that are there to use and see how you go. By the way, red against that dark black background is a bad choice in my mind in anyhow. I do like pink, and I have a weak spot for the pink.
The other issue with using colors is that if as you mentioned, I'm sorry, I'm not good with names. You mentioned sometimes these reports get printed, and if it gets printed in black and white, that's all gone. All you get to see is the contrast. So if you're using colors that don't have much contrast, they just vanish.
It's how they work in grayscale. So this is a photography trick. If you can actually print 4 colors together and the grayscale is identical in that color, it'll print as just the one color. You won't see anything except a complete gray page. So let me see if I can show you that in terms of setting your colors. And we want to do that with home and change our colors and more colors. And we can actually go to custom. So if my range on everything is in the same range, it'll be it'll all print equal grey
Hmm.
because it
You
doesn't.
can actually use grayscale for doing this stuff, and I do find that useful, but it gets a bit boring.
So there's pink, but now what I've done is I've lightened the pink up. Can you see that now, Peter?
Yep.
Is that easier for you to read, Peter?
Yeah, no, that's fine.
And
So,
the reason why
what I
it's
would
easier
say
to
about
read is I've added more white.
that's right. So what I would say about this is that we know that something like 15% of the male population is colourblind to some extent, and it's mainly in that red-green, although some people are colourblind in blue. So it's those colours that cause the most problem. So things like yellow and blue, not so much. So if you are going to use these colours to define things, to make things stand out, they're a much better choice than red for the majority of people.
And there's a slight problem here, Peter, in that, of course, we can't use green a lot because our green is already there. But I wonder if I use lime green,
which has got a high yellow content, so
it's actually,
no problem.
Yeah, it's actually got a little bit more yellow and a little bit more white in it. So again, it's picking your tones, and ideally, whatever you're using, you'd want it to have a fairly good contrast to start off with. So
with your background. So if you're looking at your white roof, then black is a good option because it stands out.
Yeah, absolutely. Or a dark tone of any description. So if I go,
or a dark tone,
and I just move this, you'll see that now the 24 is not as anywhere near as apparent there. If I go to ignoring Peter's color blindness, more colors, and then sorry, custom. If I start to increase the amount of black, in other words, if it printed on the grayscale, it would be very dark. Now it becomes a little easier to read, but not a lot.
Not a lot. So the other thing you can do when you have trouble with the text that you want to indicate melding into the background is to use a contrasting box. So instead of having that box transparent, you can actually color it. And I find that works really well too.
You can. One of the things that happens when you color the box or color the background, so I'll put that back in, layout. Where is it?
It can get very busy.
It can, and you can often lose the well, you do lose the detail that's behind. So what you end up with is a box that's solid color. So if, come on, it wasn't happy, so I'm just gonna, it's still not happy. I should be able to just drag that, but it's not letting me drag it. So you can lose information behind, but if you've got a lot of space around, there's nothing that says you can't put your 24 in a box there and an arrow.
You can also manage the box to fit the whatever it is that you're saying a lot closer to. You don't have to have a huge box.
Oh no, that's right. So I've reduced the box size down there, but I can't go much smaller than that. And I don't know why it's not letting me do it, but it's not. If I take that down,
you mentioned earlier, Mark, that there are other word processing programs.
Yep.
Some of them work just as well. So I don't have this trouble. I can manipulate these things really easily.
I can normally manipulate this easily, but it's misbehaving at the moment.
Right.
I just
it does happen.
Yeah, and unfortunately, it happens more in Windows applications than you would like to have happen. But I'll just draw a new text box, and you can see it won't even let me do that now. And I think that's perhaps that I'm sharing. I don't know. But yes, you can see the issue of how color blindness may impact on how we communicate. And I know my preferred line is usually a red arrow. I don't know whether anyone else is the same, But what I know now
You
is
also see colours being used in, say, a property boundary outline to indicate, this is the subject property, and that can be difficult as well.
so keeping away from intense reds. So if I go back to my colours again at home, and we go to colour selection, and you'll be able to tell me, Peter, as you look at them, the things that are down in this red scale here are more problematic. The things for you, because you're red-green, the greens, in particular the darker greens, are more problematic. But the hypertext blue, for example, is one that you don't have problems with because you don't suffer from that blue.
That's right.
Blueness.
And it is quite uncommon in the general population. So, I mean, some people are completely colourblind, so you can't, But,
you can't do everything to everyone. And the other thing that you
Yeah.
mentioned, Peter, and it certainly is true again, and I'll close this one down and see whether I can get it to behave itself again, is you can install your shape in a particular configuration. You can use information in shape like a texture. So shape, and we're going to insert an arrow. So I can have a textured arrow like this, and I can actually insert that fill, more colors. Not allowing me to do it here.
Yeah, that's particularly important when you're colouring sections. So, you want to say, well, this area is flood prone and that area is an asset protection zone. So rather than using just colours, if you add a texture as well, then that gives additional information and makes it quite clear what it is that you're talking about. And I see stuff where there are 12, 20 different fields on a map, and because there's so many, the colours are so similar that the only way for me to see which is to go and ask my wife.
Yeah, that's hardly proven, but there we are. I've just added a texture in there.
Yeah. And that gives unmistakable additional information that's not colour dependent.
And so even if that is in the red tones, that's not an issue for you.
Yeah, so long as you can see the texture, it's not an issue because it's a shape, not a colour.
And it's the crosshatch, and Word will allow you to insert a crosshatch into that, and it would normally occur on the right-hand side of my screen, but it's not allowing me to do that at the moment, so that's just bad luck. But it will allow you to put it, so that at the moment it's useless from Peter's side. The other thing you can put in, and it's interesting, the TAFE training manuals use a picture as their insert. And so you can actually insert a picture, or you can set a gradient up, and more gradients. There it is. Okay, great, guys. It's now come up. You can do a pattern fill. So there's a pattern fill. If I do that, can't get it wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. It's quite distinct, clear information.
And even if I did that in red and did the thing that I should never do and check the background color as blue. Sorry, you're green, aren't you, Peter?
Yeah.
I want to go to a fairly dark green. You can still see the difference because there's a textural change. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yep. Yep. It's quite adequate.
Does that help everyone on the issue of selecting colors to be a little bit more colorblind friendly? Now, of course, if the report is for somebody you don't like, by all means stick to red and green. But if you remember, the purpose of a report is to try and communicate effectively. So on that basis, it makes perfectly good sense to take the time to do that. So excellent. Thanks, Peter. Go on.
Well, while we're on colours, I just thought one of my original ports when I was at TAFE that you marked, something that you highlighted was actually when I highlighted stuff within my report. So having text with background and highlighting colours of sort of reds, greens, oranges, that when you actually print them off, especially in a black and white, it can actually just be blacked out on the actual printing. If you
Yeah, and look,
understand
there's been a lot of research that shows that, that human beings read on the basis of space. On a printed text, it's the white space. On online text, we can do both light and dark, transmitted and non-transmitted light. But generally, we do best reading the white spaces. So white space.
I mean, like if I had like a sentence and I was to highlight that a dark blue, if I was to print that off black and white, that it could actually be blacked out when it was printed off.
So if I did, and the perfect one is redacted text in that regards. So if you go redacted text there.
Yeah, so that if I printed it off, choosing the wrong color when highlighting can, yeah.
Yeah, but the one thing we do know about that, Luke, is back in the old days, photocopiers were pretty good. When you photocopied a page that you'd highlighted with a highlighter, it normally wouldn't pick up much of the highlighting. The reason for it is this is a fairly pale color. You can pale this out more and it'll do more. Unfortunately, Peter, you'll be glad to know this. Word doesn't allow you to change the tonality of your highlighting. Okay. It's one of those dumb things that doesn't do. The other thing that Word doesn't do, and Peter, if your software does, I'll be an instant convert, is it won't allow me to set up a glossary, an automatic glossary. And I've said this before in class, the first software designer that comes up with a word processing software that as soon as you use a word that's in your glossary list says, do you want to have this as a glossary hypertext link to the glossary in your report and add the word to your glossary in your report, has got me sold, because that would make report writing just so exciting. But
I'm not sure. I think it might be possible to do something like that.
Go and ask the users if that would be just such a valuable tool, Peter, to make report writing so much more effective. Any time I used a standard bit of term jargon, it would take that away. Anyone else want to talk about any other thing today? We've got about 5 minutes before we need to start talking about what we're going to do at future meetings and how frequently and how often we want those meetings. In the absence of silence, I'd say that we've covered it. So it seems like we could easily cover 3 or 4 items like that, or 1 or 2 bigger items at each get together. So the question is, how often would you like to meet?
It's pretty easy to do it this way. So it's as a short sort of a half-hour get together, it seems like it's something that could be achieved on a more regular basis.
So what do you mean? Something like once a fortnight or once
a fortnight to begin with could be quite possible, I think.
I'll push that down to once a month.
Once a month?
Okay, yeah, actually, I was thinking once a month, depending on what we might be working on in between meetings. So once a month might be quite good.
Yeah, okay, good. So once a month, it would be comfortable for me because, again, I've still got other things going on. For those of you who don't know, Jessica's just had a baby, so I'm being a lot more of a grandfather for the first time ever.
Congratulations.
I had nothing to do with it. So in terms of meetings, a half-an-hour format is really neat. We can go up to 45 minutes and then we drop out. So you'll find that the system just finishes and everyone cuts off. So I'm happy to be able to keep it flexible between 30 and 45 minutes, depending on how much stuff we're going through. If it gets to the 45 minutes and we haven't finished, well, we pick it up the next time round. Is everyone
Yep.
happy with that as an approach?
Yeah.
Sounds good.
That sounds good.
It's good.
Okay, what things would you like to discuss?
Well, risk in general is always something that's worth touching on occasionally to, refresh. I am going to that upcoming course,
Valid?
Valid.
Yep.
So
Half an
that's
hour
to
is nowhere
refresh
near
my
long
mind.
enough to half an hour is nowhere near long enough to deal with risk though.
It isn't, but
Certain maths aspects.
yeah, we could deal with components. And again, I'm happy to share, not every detail that I've got, but I'm happy to certainly share a lot of the things that I do and to have a look at other reports and say, I just did one the other day. I didn't include it in the document because I thought it would be inappropriate, but it was a risk report that was at a council that used Matheny and Clark's hazard assessment system. And I thought, boy, I wonder whether, and I'm sure Scott Wilkie would have been, because as Hornsby Council, Scott would have said, this is not even a risk assessment. I'm not including it. I'll just dismiss the information. So looking at what sort of things we want and how to deal with those, how to deal with communicating things like uncertainty. And in fact, I just wrote a little section on that the other day.
Something, if you want to start somewhere, something as simple as the difference between a risk and a hazard is something that I still find a lot of people just don't understand.
Yeah, and it is stuff that we need to communicate clearly. I was dealing with uncertainty the other day, and this issue of how things can or can't be uncertain.
So we're going to run out of time, Mark. So rather than start working on the actual detail of this, we probably should stick to the process. So if you're happy to do that, to accept submissions, queries and stuff, perhaps you could let us know where we should send them.
If you send them to reports, reports at arboristnetwork.com.au.
And particularly with this risk, I think it's a great topic, but particular aspects of it, because we do only have half an hour, so that would be, I think that would be useful.
Yep, and I'll share with you some of those things. So I've already put that down. So I'm going to look at uncertainty and benchmarking and the significance of them. One of the things that I can tell you is I asked the students in this publication, there's about 120 odd pages, to estimate how many letters there are in the document. And I'm going to wager you now, and we'll do it next time, but I'll wager you, none of you will say there was only one character in it. None of you will say there's 10. None of you will say there's 100. You very quickly start to get a range that you're comfortable with. And that's what benchmarking is about. So we'll look at benchmarking and uncertainty in some more details. And Kai, you'll get some of that from David Evans when you go to his training.
Yep.
If you've got a do's of a report, and there have been some real wonderful ones out there, by all means, send them in. I will redact most of the non-relevant stuff. I don't want to have anyone say, you've gone out and you've deliberately set out to embarrass or upset me. If I've written the report, the only stuff that I'll redact is stuff that may be sensitive from a client's perspective. Apart from that, I don't see any point in pretending that I'm not a complete screw up as a writer. Okay. The only difference is I've been screwing up for a lot longer than everyone but Peter. So I've picked up some skills on the way. lots of them. So then when do we want to meet? What day of the week? What time?
Yeah, we nearly finished.
So was that Kath?
Yes.
About this time,
So
so
the
6:30 again.
6:30 time slot was good. It gives enough time for people that are doing out in the field work or work in a government department, whatever, to get back. Yep. Derek, does it work okay for you?
Yep, 6:30 works well.
Okay, so 6:30 to it will be a strict 7:15 finish, because at 7:15 they'll disconnect us.
Okay. And
We'll try and finish at 7 on each occasion, but if the topic's hot and we're happy with it, we'll keep on going for the 15 extra.
Yeah.
Ms. Austin,
that's
does
good.
that work for you? Because I know you've got to travel for an hour and a half to get down to Narrabeen and kick your feet up.
Please. Sounds fabulous. Thank you, sir.
Okay. Peter, is there anything else that we expect the group to start to increase in size? So the more people,
So that's the 20th of April, yeah?
Yeah.
would be a horror, wouldn't it? The 20th of April, I
Is
believe.
that
I am in. Oh no, 20th of April. I'm traveling to Queensland. How would we go on a Monday evening?
no problem for me?
yeah, Monday.
No
be
problem.
good.
Okay, Mondays are great for me because I'm always writing for TAFE on a Monday. So it just means after I've finished writing, I sit in the office for an extra hour and write for an extra hour whilst I get ready for the meeting.
Okay.
Okay.
Monday.
19th.
19th, that's great. Excellent, guys. 19th at 6:30. Find me a report that you think's a real doozer, or it's got something in it that's funny. As I said, I thought that one the other day. This tree is probably, this tree is possibly a risk and probably should be removed. Was just too good not to have as a quote.
Yeah.
Mm.
Okay.
Okay.
So I think we're all good, certainly for this size, and maybe the next couple of meetings, the Zoom should work for us. If we get a really large group happening, we might have to change the format, but I think we can worry about that if and when it happens.
Okay, to that regard, Joe Harris has already said Arbos has a full commercial Zoom license that we can use, but I'd be just as happy to say that if we're getting to 100, we've probably got more than we need. Is it 100 people or 50 people? I can't remember. It's one of the two. And to get to that level, it's really first in, first serve. So those that arrive 5 minutes late will miss out. It's the way it goes.
Yeah.
Sounds fair. Natural selection.
Oh yes, you know my view on that. Give me the 5. Okay, guys. Well, thanks very much for coming along this evening, and it's great to be able to do something like this just to touch up our knowledge and skills. I think it's just a great little platform, and it's really something that I'm looking forward to doing more of with you.
Yes, thanks very much, Mark.
Thank you.
That's great.
We appreciate your
Thanks, sir.
efforts.
Yeah, thanks, mate. Thanks, guys.
My pleasure.
Thank you,
Catch you guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good evening.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.